All right, so as we're hearing now, the President Trump briefly appeared at the courts yesterday. So I'll just ask the order crew to move on. Let's carry on with the interview, okay? At the Florida District Court in Miami on federal charges for allegedly mishandling sensitive national defense documents and reportedly trying to conceal them at the Mar-a-Lago Florida estate after leaving the White House. So now this is according to a grand jury indictment that was released last week. The 37-count indictment includes violations of the Espionage Act, which criminalise unauthorised possession of defence information, and conspiracy to obstruct justice that carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. This is Trump's second indictment, the first criminal prosecution of a former US president. Well, Trump denied any wrongdoing and regards the charges as a witch hunt and interference to the elections. So for more on this, let's chat virtually from Frankfurt by Professor Gilbert Khadiagala. He's the director of Africa's Center for the Study of American Relations at the Wits University. Great to have you. Thanks very, very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So, as we've been seeing in the insert and also informing viewers of what's been going on, this is Trump's second indictment. But let's talk about the case. Does he have a case to answer to?
The case is heavily loaded with charges from obstruction to concealment, so it's fairly heavy than I think we've ever seen before. And of course, we are talking about 37 charges, which are actually almost related, but they speak to different components of what is considered the crime of concealing top secrets. He's not supposed to have had access to them, but I think he still believes that he legitimately had a right to have those documents. But the government has put up a case, which is part of the indictment, that there is no law, there is no US law that allows a former president to have those kinds of documents. And he was given many, many opportunities to return those documents, and he apparently never did take that seriously. So it's a whole range of charges that look, I think, from the surface to be a very solid case on the part of the prosecution. But again, this is a preliminary process, a preliminary beginning of a process that is going to take a lot of time.
Yeah. And
you have the lawyers, taking sides and coming up. In fact, his defense is already preparing to poke a lot of holes in those in the indictment. So we are not very sure how this case will go. But I think also the very polarization of the U.S. now reveals how many people really are talking about the case. There are people who are very clearly happy that he'll be indicted and he'll go to prison. But there are others who believe, in fact, that case is not as watertight as we think it is. So, again, very early in the process, this may even take a year. The prosecutor, the special prosecutor, wants it to be completed very quickly. But it is not as easy as that, because it will have to go through a lot of processes in the court systems, and that can be very cumbersome. So it's not really clear at this point.
I imagine so, and it certainly is one of those cumbersome cases. And I mean, a very serious. I mean, the charges and the documents that were sort of found concealed. I mean, these are nuclear plans. These are the country's military, secret documents and things that should never have been removed in the first place and being found. So these are serious charges. Even though the former president is downplaying them and saying that this is merely a witch hunt. But the question now is, how is this going to divide or further divide American citizens? And, the support for Trump, what is that looking like? And his run for the US presidency. So let's talk about the American psyche and the division of the citizens right now.
The polls that have been conducted since the indictment was unsealed Friday revealed that, in fact, within the Republican Party, his numbers are going up. I think going up now by about 61%. as opposed to his closest challenger, who is only at 23%. I saw that one of those polls. So it shows that I think the indictment has helped him now within his base. The problem is whether that can be translated into a nationwide support for Trump. Again, it's a dual process. You have to be elected within the Republican Party, but even if he wins the nomination, then he has to compete with the Democrat, whether it's Joe Biden or whoever comes up from the Democratic side. So that's a more competitive race at the national level, because you have a lot of people who think clearly that Trump is a criminal and he should be in jail. And maybe those numbers from the Democratic side are growing and growing, or from the moderates, people who often would vote for either side. So I think he may do very well in the nomination as the Republican candidate, because he has a lot of supporters, and the supporters are now being fired by what they think is a political prosecution by the federal government. So we'll see how his numbers. I think he's in the short to medium term is going to do very well.
It sounds like it. It certainly sounds like it, because it is reported that some legal experts saying that the evidence, though, amounts to a very, very strong case against Trump. But as you said, this may not go to trial until after November 2024 elections. And Trump is free to campaign for the presidency in the meantime. I mean, he could even take office if he were found to be guilty. But talk to us about this. I mean, what would that do to America and opinions of this presidential campaign and the chances of actually getting back into the White House with this hanging over his head?
You know, it will be a first, but Trump has broken many firsts. So I would not be shocked that a candidate who is a very polarizing candidate like Donald Trump has been impeached twice. Now he's been indicted twice. So, I mean, and there are still other cases coming up. So it is not impossible to rule out the fact that he could be elected next year, and therefore those charges will be hanging over him. But I think the other problem the U.S. will have to confront is that if he's elected as president before the case is concluded, potentially he could, in fact, those charges could be dropped. So that's another component to the case. The longer it drags on, the more it gives him the opportunity, if he's lucky to win in the next elections, and if he does win, I think he has more power over over the ruling, in fact. So
indeed, and that was very. And I think that's what many people are actually thinking, is that you know, if he is in power, you know, that's one. You nailed it when you said that Trump has done a lot of firsts. That's kind of what Trump is. Because we were struggling to get hold of you, our time is really nearly up. But I have to ask you before we go, in terms of the South Africa and US, after reports about the US and the whole issue of these 4 congressmen saying and signing a document saying that they don't want South Africa to be hosting the AGOA, that's the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act summit that's meant to be happening in this year, and some saying this is a punishment for South Africa's support towards Russia during the Ukraine and Russia war. What does this mean to South Africa, or for South Africa, if we lose status like this?
It will be bad news for South Africa, because the AGOA preferences are big for the economy. They are important for the South African exports to the US. If AGOA is rescinded on South Africa's part, I think it will be really bad news for the economy that is already facing a lot of problems. I think the bigger issue here is that the US does not trust what it's hearing from South Africa about Russia and its military engagement. So the people, the senators and congressmen who have come up with this statement are simply saying that we do not believe you. And that's why we don't think that you should be hosting an AGOA summit this year. So I don't think it looks good for South Africa, but probably there's still room for South Africa to make a convincing case that AGOA privileges should not be rescinded, and that the US can probably make an exception and listen to the case from Pretoria. But for now, it doesn't look good.
All right, let's leave it there. Prof, what a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks very, very much for giving us your time. Professor Gilbert Khadiagala, he's a director of the Africa Center for the Study of the US. He's at Wits University, and he's talking to us about former US President Donald Trump's brief court appearance yesterday after he was indicted and criminally charged, and also telling us that the US relations with South Africa, with what's happening around AGOA, is not looking good for the country.